The Second World War, a global conflict marked by unprecedented brutality, birthed some of the darkest chapters in human history. Among these shadows lurks the horrifying reality of Unit 731, a clandestine creation of the Imperial Japanese Army. This sinister biological and chemical warfare research unit, operating under a veil of secrecy, engaged in experiments of unimaginable cruelty upon human prisoners, all in pursuit of developing deadly weapons. Their actions stand as a stark testament to the depths of depravity that can be reached in the name of war, and a chilling reminder of the ethical boundaries that must never be crossed. Established as a core component of Japan's wartime ambitions, Unit 731 was strategically located in China, a nation already ravaged by Japanese aggression. Within its fortified compounds, a living nightmare unfolded. It is documented that approximately 3,000 individuals, men, women, and even children, were systematically subjected to horrific experimentation. The vast majority of these victims were Chinese, bearing the brunt of the occupying forces' brutality. However, the unit's callous disregard for human life extended beyond national borders, encompassing prisoners from allied nations, the Soviet Union, Korea, and Mongolia. Operating with ample funding and unwavering support from the Japanese government, Unit 731 persisted in its gruesome work until the very end of the war in 1945, leaving behind a legacy of unspeakable suffering. The driving force behind Unit 731's horrific activities was a relentless pursuit of developing and perfecting biological and chemical weapons for military deployment. To achieve this diabolical objective, the researchers deemed it necessary to test their deadly concoctions and delivery methods directly on human subjects. But the scope of their experimentation extended beyond weapon development. Driven by a cold, scientific curiosity, they also sought to unravel the very limits of human physiological endurance. By subjecting prisoners to extreme conditions, they aimed to gain a deeper understanding of what the human body could withstand, knowledge that the Japanese military hoped to exploit to benefit their own soldiers, a chillingly pragmatic application of unimaginable suffering. One particularly brutal area of experimentation focused on the devastating effects of extreme cold, a harsh reality faced by countless soldiers during wartime. At Unit 731, this environmental threat was weaponized against human beings. Prisoners were deliberately exposed to the frigid temperatures of the Manchurian winter, often taken outside and subjected to repeated dousing with water until their limbs became frozen solid. The researchers meticulously documented the progression of frostbite, viewing these living bodies as mere specimens in their macabre study. Guards would even strike the frozen limbs, the hollow sound confirming the extent of the tissue damage. Following this deliberate infliction of frostbite, the doctors would then embark on a series of agonizing experiments aimed at determining the most effective methods for thawing the frozen tissues. Some prisoners were simply left to thaw naturally, enduring the excruciating pain as sensation returned. Others were subjected to various forms of rewarming, ranging from the application of lukewarm water to scalding hot water. Through these inhumane trials, the Japanese doctors reportedly concluded that water temperatures exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but not surpassing 122 degrees Fahrenheit yielded the best results, a chillingly clinical observation derived from the profound suffering of their living subjects. Another core element of Unit 731's horrifying agenda was a practice of vivisection, the surgical dissection of living organisms. Driven by a desire to understand the progression of diseases and the impact of injuries on the human body, the researchers routinely operated on live prisoners without the slightest regard for their pain or suffering. Many of these victims were deliberately infected with deadly pathogens before being strapped down for the agonizing procedures. The absence of anesthesia amplified the sheer terror and agony endured by these individuals. The researchers' rationale was chillingly clinical. They needed to observe the effects of the disease on living organs before the process of natural decomposition began. These human guinea pigs were stripped of their humanity, reduced to mere biological specimens, and referred to by the dehumanizing term maruas, or logs. Testimonies from former personnel paint a graphic picture of these operations, recounting the horrific screams and contorted faces of the victims as they were cut open, their inner workings exposed to the cold, detached observation of the Japanese surgeons. The development and testing of lethal pathogens formed a central pillar of Unit 731's activities. Researchers cultivated and experimented with a wide array of deadly microorganisms, including those responsible for cholera, anthrax, and the bubonic plague. These pathogens were not only tested on captive prisoners within the confines of the facility, but were also deployed in what the unit chillingly referred to as field testing. This involved the deliberate release of disease-causing agents into unsuspecting small communities in China. The aim was to observe whether these releases could successfully trigger widespread outbreaks of infectious diseases, effectively turning civilian populations into unwitting test subjects in their quest for biological weapons. Some of these experiments tragically succeeded, demonstrating potential for mass devastation that these weapons held. Emboldened by their successes in these field tests, the researchers at Unit 731 conceived an even more audacious and terrifying plan: to carry these deadly pathogens to the United States. Their strategy involved the deployment of what were known as balloon bombs, rudimentary devices designed to drift across the Pacific Ocean and release their deadly payloads over American territory. It is documented that the Japanese did indeed launch approximately 200 of these balloons toward the U.S. However, these attempts largely proved unsuccessful, with only a small number reaching their intended target. Tragically, even these limited successes resulted in the deaths of 7 innocent American civilians. In an even more chillingly direct threat, Unit 731 also formulated a plan to unleash plague-infected fleas upon the city of San Diego, utilizing kamikaze pilots to deliver their deadly cargo, a stark illustration of the unit's utter disregard for human life on a global scale. Beyond biological agents, Unit 731 also dedicated significant resources to the testing of conventional weaponry and chemical agents. Human prisoners were once again the unwilling subjects in these brutal trials. They would be taken to open fields, bound to stakes, and used as live targets for a variety of weapons, ranging from standard firearms to hand grenades. The researchers meticulously documented the resulting injuries, seeking to understand precise damage inflicted by their arsenals at different distances and under various conditions. In a particularly horrifying aspect of this testing, prisoners were also subjected to the effects of toxic gases. In one documented incident, a test involving poisonous gas took a terrifying turn when a sudden shift in the wind direction sent the lethal fumes back towards the Japanese soldiers, forcing them to flee in panic. Furthermore, the unit's personnel would occasionally employ flamethrowers on the defenseless prisoners, demonstrating the sheer barbarity of their experimentation. While the preserved body parts found in jars throughout Unit 731 hinted at the myriad ways in which prisoners met their end, the specific details of their deaths were often shrouded in secrecy. However, some of the more explicitly recalled methods paint a truly horrifying picture. One such method involved the use of a pressure chamber. Prisoners would be sealed inside this device, sometimes in pairs, and internal pressure would be relentlessly increased until their bodies could no longer withstand the strain, leading to a gruesome death marked by ruptured organs and popped eyes. If this wasn't horrific enough, other prisoners were reportedly subjected to experiments involving extreme centrifugal force, literally spun to death in macabre attempt to test the limits of human tolerance to such physical stresses. Driven by a desire to improve surgical techniques, the personnel at Unit 731 also engaged in live surgical experimentation. Reports detail procedures performed on prisoners that served no therapeutic purpose whatsoever. In one particularly disturbing account, a prisoner was subjected to an appendectomy, followed by the removal of an arm, and finally a tracheotomy, all within a 90-minute time frame. Once the experiment was complete, the doctors simply killed the patient. Shockingly, the individual who performed these procedures was reportedly a student doctor at the time, sent to China under the guise of gaining surgical practice, completely unprepared for the ethical abyss he was about to enter. His later recollections reveal the profound and lasting impact of these horrific experiences. The depravity of Unit 731 extended even to the deliberate spread of venereal diseases. Testimony from a worker within the unit reveals that initial attempts to infect prisoners through injections were abandoned in favor of a more direct and brutal method: forced sexual acts between prisoners. Those who refused to comply faced immediate execution. In other instances, children were intentionally infected with syphilis. The horrifying rationale behind these actions was to allow the researchers to study the progression of the disease through vivisection at various stages of infection, observing its devastating effects on internal organs. Female prisoners were also subjected to forced pregnancy, a further violation aimed at understanding the transmission of diseases to offspring and the damage inflicted on the reproductive organs during pregnancy. Even women already injured from other experiments were subjected to this horrific abuse. While it is believed that numerous children were born within the confines of the camp, none are thought to have survived, their fates lost to the unit's relentless cruelty. One former soldier chillingly remarked, "Of course, there were experiments on children, but probably their fathers were spies, a callous dismissal of profound suffering inflicted upon these innocent lives." For decades following the war, the atrocities committed by Unit 731 remained largely unspoken, a dark secret buried within the collective memory of Japan. However, in 2018, a significant development occurred when Japan released a substantial amount of previously classified information from its national archives pertaining to Unit 731. Prior to this, much of the world's knowledge of the unit's activities was based primarily on survivor testimonies and fragmented accounts. While the core horrors have never been denied, these newly released documents have shed further light on the smaller, equally disturbing experiments that also took place within the unit's walls. These included subjecting prisoners to lethal levels of radiation, injecting them with the blood of animals, infusing their bodies with seawater, and even burning them alive, a grim litany of unimaginable suffering. It has also come to light that during the war, the United States was aware of Unit 731's existence and its horrific research. In a controversial decision driven by Cold War anxieties, the U.S. granted immunity to the physicians of Unit 731 in exchange for full access to their research findings, fearing that this potentially valuable information might otherwise fall into the hands of the Soviet Union. A stark illustration of the complex and often morally ambiguous choices made in the pursuit of national advantage.